Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we'll be talking about the second Joker film. Following the success of the first film comes a sequel that I think it's fair to say not many of us expected or necessarily wanted, but it came nonetheless. I personally really enjoyed the first Joker and I had high expectations going into this film. With the expense of the cinema these days, I wanted to share my opinions with you and maybe it can help you decide if it's worth your time, money and attention. There won't be any major spoilers in what I say, but it wouldn't be possible to talk about the film in an effective way without somewhat minor spoilers, so just be wary. But before that, just a quick spoiler-free summary of the plot of the film. The film is set 2 or 3 years after the end of the first film. It focuses on the incarceration and court trial of Arthur Fleck. During his imprisonment, he meets a woman by the name of Harley Quinn, who is one of the many supporters of the Joker since he appeared on The Murray Show. The film focuses closely on the events from the first film and what caused Arthur to do what he did. Are Arthur and Joker the same person, or is the Joker one of Arthur's personalities that he created in response to his trauma? We'll start with some good points, then go over some bad points and what it feels comparable to. Then some general thoughts on the film itself. Good points. The world feels genuine. It feels lived in and authentic. It's what I would expect to see in Gotham. Unfortunately, we don't get to see as much of it as the first film, but we'll talk about that later. The acting by everyone involved is great. Brendan Gleeson was a pleasant surprise and always good to see, but obviously the main focus is Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga, the obvious main characters of the film. Joaquin Phoenix is very much the same as the first, giving the same high-end performance that we saw as the character of Arthur Fleck. I say as Arthur Fleck because that's who we really see him as for most of the film, and not the Joker. I'm always worried when the marketing point of a film is that a singer, wrestler, insert celebrity that is not an actor or actress is the star of a film, especially with a role that relies heavily on acting ability. However, having never seen Lady Gaga in an acting role before, I'll admit she gives a great performance as an interpretation of Harley Quinn. She was believable as the character. While Margot Robbie may look and sound more like the Harley Quinn we know, Lady Gaga gives the aura of crazy, obsession and danger that we never get to see from Robbie. Later on in the story, I would like to have seen the relationship between her and the Joker become more dangerous and one-sided, like we know from some versions in the comics and games, but it doesn't quite get to that stage. Also, not really a criticism, but I found that I kept staring at her top lip during the movie. She's had some work done to it, and it's neither a criticism nor compliment, but I felt weirdly compelled to mention it, and I think some people may have felt the same way. Story and plot not taken into account right now, it's a very well-made film. You can tell that a lot of passion went into making it. The pacing is slow, but it is consistent, and the costume design and makeup is fantastic. The musical aspect works quite well, for the most part. It could maybe benefit from having 3 or 4 less musical numbers in the film, and sometimes the talk singing doesn't seem necessary, and apart from 1 or 2 songs, they don't actually seem to benefit the story. But most of the musical numbers are short and they don't take you out of the film. The music worked well in the first film, and this seems to be an exaggerated extension of that. I wouldn't say that any of the songs were particularly memorable, as a pseudo-musical type of thing, but Lady Gaga, not surprisingly, puts on a good show with her voice. Also, credit for trying to do something different than the first, rather than a copy and paste version of the same thing. However, that being said, when the first film is considered to be excellent among the many, maybe less diversion would have been better. It's also subtly funny at times. Little comments and expressions from Gaga and Phoenix brought a few laughs from the audience. Also, if people care, there's little tidbits and member berries for those interested in the world of DC and Batman. Some are as blunt as being hit in the face with a brick that has the word reference carved into it, while others are a little more subtle. Arkham Asylum in particular, where the majority of the film is set, is designed and shown very well. It gives the depressing, creepy vibes that remind me personally of playing through the Arkham Asylum when it released many years ago. Now on to the cons. Realism. Realism is partly a pro. It's one of the things that made the first movie stand out. But when it comes to the Joker and his development of a character, I was expecting things to step up for the actual character itself as a threat. I'm not saying that he needs to become an overnight UFC title holder, but there are ways that the Joker can become more dangerous. Knives, guns, rage, use of henchmen, criminal empire, followers, and clever thinking. Obviously, in this version, Arthur's Joker probably isn't the best candidate for being a clever thinking criminal mastermind, but that's where Harley Quinn could have been utilised in this interpretation. She is educated and manipulative. With her brains and psychology awareness, she could have been the driving force for his image and those that support him. In a universe where Batman is supposed to exist, realism can take a slight backseat. If Batman was trying to be realistic, we would see him die within the first couple of weeks on the job. So I think it's fair to say that a few liberties can be taken with Joker and Harley's abilities too, to make Arthur seem slightly less helpless. So again, about the setting, while Arkham Asylum is fantastic, it is where the majority of the film is set. It's also one of two settings that are used for about 80% of the film. Bearing in mind that the remaining 20% includes dream sequences, imaginary sequences and other, it begs the question as to how exactly this film had a budget of $200 million, when the first film only had a budget of $50 million. And the first film had a world that felt so much more filled. I don't know what they were paying Lady Gaga, but unless they spent $150 million on her alone, which I highly doubt, I don't really know what they spent it on. $100 million might be reasonable for this movie, but $200 million just doesn't seem to make sense. The story and plot seem to be so focused on the events from the first Joker, it never really develops its own story. It never feels like it's progressed anywhere since the beginning. It feels like we've walked a very long distance sideways and kind of ended up at the same point of time as where we've started, but we've kind of slowly lost interest along the way. So what are some examples of what I would compare it to give you an understanding of what it's like to experience the film? Structure-wise, once upon a time in Hollywood, there was a steady pace with a slow build-up, with the film rewarding you at the end with 20 to 30 minutes of satisfaction. The Joker 2, about 30 minutes before the end, makes you question whether you will get that climax or payoff. Just when the story makes you think it's not going to happen, you finally see a glimpse that the payoff is coming. Until about 3 minutes later, when it decides that it actually won't give you the payoff and it's going to go through the same steady 15 minutes that the film started with. If I had to describe how the film made me feel in the most detailed way that someone might be able to understand, and it barely made me feel anything, I would describe it as a scaled down version of the following. If you were one of the people that ever played The Last of Us 2 and you went into it from the first game full of excitement and certain that you would be satisfied and that they could meet your expectations, and as you play you see that something isn't quite right, but you convince yourself that you're in safe hands. After all, these are the same people that made the first masterpiece. They know what they're doing, right? But then the feeling that something isn't quite right just doesn't go away. Then before you know it, you're at the end of it and you feel like a sense of emptiness and questioning. And unfortunately, that's just how it made me feel. The first film makes you think about topics and ask questions. Does society create a monster? Are people destined to become a monster? Actions have consequences. The importance for help with those with mental illness. How quickly a movement can start. The class wars, importance of kindness, and many more. The second film doesn't make you think of questions. It gives you an answer to a question you didn't ask. The answer is, being the Joker is bad and you shouldn't want to be the Joker, because that's bad. I don't think anyone is under the illusion that the Joker is a good person, but it seems as though they wanted to play it safe and avoid any potential backlash of people wanting to be like the Joker. So, as most of us are probably aware, the first film faced backlash from critics saying that it glorified violence and mental illness. They were potentially concerned that someone flipping the switch and saying screw it to society was potentially a risk for viewers to do the same. If people can relate to the downfall of Arthur Fleck and his transition to the Joker, maybe the person in the audience, who also feels abandoned by society and alone, relating to the initial steps taken by Arthur, then maybe they will carry out the final steps that the Joker does. This is especially important to be wary of when the world in its current state doesn't seem to be at its best. So I do think this is a valid concern. By glorifying the Joker and seeing him go on a killing rampage could potentially, unintentionally inspire others to do the same, and it's a subject that should be handled with care. But unfortunately, if you're going to make a film about a deranged psychopath that has lost their sense of what is good, betrayed by society again and again until they break and lose their identity, adopting a new one to face the cruel, cruel world, then they probably should be doing something that a character like that would do. Overall, I think it begs the question, if you're not willing to take the risk to make a character true to themselves because of real-world consequences, why make a sequel in the first place to a film that never needed one? The first film is a journey where the audience sees Arthur Fleck transform into the Joker. Joker 2 is a film where you see Arthur Fleck turn into Arthur Fleck. There's obviously the theory that this version of the Joker isn't the real Joker, due to the age difference between Arthur and Bruce in the first film, and that he would not serve as a credible threat to Batman. But that doesn't fill the emptiness that the film has left. And in a world where cinema seems to be dying, leaving the cinema in silence with no excited talk surrounding you as you walk out the doors back to reality, it's not going to help. I personally went to watch this in IMAX with my girlfriend, which cost nearly £19 for one ticket. This obviously doesn't include the parking charges, suites and the mandatory Tango Ice Blast, and I know that's a choice, but as part of the ritual by this point, it suddenly becomes a very expensive date. When you can just wait and then spend £8 to rent or £14 or whatever it is to buy it when it releases a few months later, or even waiting a year or two until it's probably free on one of the main streaming sites. It's becoming very difficult to justify actually going to the cinema at all. I think this is a very average movie and most people are going to rate it between a 4 to a 6 out of 10. And my genuine advice would be to not bother going to the cinema to watch it. Worst case scenario, wait till it releases on streaming and rent it, but ideally you'll just wait until it's free on streaming.